Broadcasting from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. This is The Gailey Show. I am your host, JP Darabagosian, and boy, do we have a progressive show for you today. My guest is Cathy Renna, who is the communications director from the National LGBTQ Taskforce, the most progressive queer task force historically and currently operating today. And we're going to talk about Creating Change Conference, which is coming up this January and has taken on a whole new meaning given the catastrophe that has just happened. So, Cathy, welcome to The Gailey Show.
Thank you so much, JP. Good to see you.
Yeah, well, the last time we talked was in July when I was guest hosting the Matt McNeil Show, which was an entirely different dynamic than what we have right now. I don't even know. Do we want to talk about it? Like your thoughts or reactions to...
Well, you know, we were sort of discussing the other day about plenary planning, right? And we all said, you know, we haven't really done a ton because we really wanted to see what the outcome of the election was, because that's really going to determine not just the tone, but a lot of the content and who we invite and how we approach things. And, you know, frankly, now some of the additional services and spaces we're going to provide to conference attendees, given the outcome of the election.
What I am so grateful about, and I really want to encourage people to go, because wouldn't you want to be in Vegas surrounded by thousands of queer and allied folks in the 2 days after the horrifying inauguration that's going to happen on January 20th. So I encourage folks to be there. First of all, for folks who don't know about Creating Change, and we need to prepare. I mean, we're going to deal with 4 years of this, and there's no better way, I feel, than to start that at the Creating Change Conference in January. But you've all been going since 1988, right?
We have. In fact, I've been going since 1989. So I think I've only missed a handful of them. I know. I mean, I've only been on the staff a few years, but I've always been a task force fan, colleague, contractor. Like they're part of the family, and they're my political home. Like you said before, the task force is the progressive voice in the queer movement. And so the Creating Change Conference has played a huge role in my own professional life as an activist. And it's a place where, like you said, it may be the first place, a safe space that people will be in after the inauguration, or even, you know, since this week. It's literally thousands. Our registrations are much, much higher than usual for now. We all know how our folks do things last minute. So we're expecting, I mean, usually about 3,500. I think this could be the largest Creating Change ever.
And when you say registrations are higher, you mean that like people registering already, like the total number of registrations, right?
Yep, at the hotel and for the conference.
So obviously you all are still in the planning phase and need to figure out like, you know, what programming to offer, right? But generally speaking, for folks who haven't been there yet or have been there and maybe are planning again to be there in January, what can folks expect?
So Creating Change is really, I almost hesitate to call it a conference, right? It's really more of an experience because we try to bring a lot to it. So some of the programming is already in place. Like we got over 500 proposals for workshops. We could only do 110 or so. But there are workshops on all kinds of issues, you know, so whatever you're looking to do, whether it's find a space to talk in a deep way about, you know, specific community-focused issues, whether you want to do a training around fundraising, you know, whether you're someone who plans prides in your area, someone who wants to deal with and has to deal with, you know, right-wing extremism. There's something for everyone. But the sort of the backbone of the conference are the plenaries and the DLIs, the day-long institutes. So our plenaries are pretty, you know, the structure and the topics are there. We're going to do one that's similar to the one we did last year about democracy and fascism. You know, maybe we should call this one Fascism and Democracy at this point, right? So like that's going to be an intense but important conversation with movement leaders and thousands of people in the audience. It's not there's a back and forth. There's not you know, we're not just talking at folks. The Creating Change Conference is a place to really do movement building and do strategizing and, you know, again, like auspicious timing, right, immediately after the inauguration. Our final plenary is going to be on safety and security. We're talking to folks who work across issues because, you know, what's happening right now is talking to reporters, it's like they forget everything I've tried to teach them for the last 40 years. They want to talk about specifically very siloed trans issues or
Mm-hmm.
LGBT issues, and somebody else is writing about immigration, and I'm having these conversations where I'm saying, no, immigration, it's the first thing, on the chopping block. We're
Mm-hmm.
talking about mass deportation, and
Mm-hmm.
our community is disproportionately impacted by that. Trans and non-binary people, especially, who are seeking asylum in this country, or who have come to this country seeking asylum and now are petrified, right, that they're going to face deportation. So this conference really integrates all of those issues. And then, of course, we will have other parts of the plenary process. Kiera Johnson, our president, who is just extraordinary, motivational, inspirational, and very reality based. We just love her. She's really a visionary, and so she always addresses the plenary in her State of the Movement. And so we'll be able to offer that kind of space for that kind of big thinking. And then that first day, Wednesday of the conference, we have our day-long institutes, which are usually identity focused. There's one around faith. There's one for Black LGBTQ people, one for trans LGBTQ people. It's really important for folks to have a day to really not just talk about things, but come out with strategies, right, and actions and
Mm-hmm.
plans. I mean, I can't tell you how many organizations have been founded at creating change. The Equality Federation, the Consortium of Higher Ed folks. It's an incubator space, and I think that is really important.
I'm so heartened that you're going to have that distinction between fascism and democracy, because I cannot tell you the number of conversations I've had with folks who didn't vote and were like, oh, well, they're the same thing. And I'm like, no. We're not talking about Republicans and Democrats. We're talking about fascism and at the time, Democrats. And the fact that, this isn't liberals that are saying this. This is his former generals. These are his former staff members that are saying that he's a fascist, that he wants to implement fascism as much as he can in the United States. So I'm so heartened to hear that that's going to be a distinguishing feature of the conference. There
are going to be some tough conversations. I mean, and in that vein, one of the other things we really prioritize is creating spaces for queer joy, because we're not able to sustain ourselves as a community or as individuals to do this work. So, we will be doing those things all day, but then, there's a talent show, and people really bring it. It's open to the entire conference, and we know our people. It is so fun. I actually went down in my pajamas this year in New Orleans because I got all these texts saying, this is amazing. So I ran down in my PJs. We also do a house ball, which, years ago was not as sort of known. There weren't as many people in the ball community engaged. And now, 2,000 people show up because it's fabulous. And that's a real opportunity to celebrate who we are. Again, free in a safe space, with a tremendous amount of encouragement. And that's important as well.
I know it's way too soon. A lot of questions that I've been getting over the past week, or not questions that I've specifically, like I'm an expert or anything, but the conversations that I've been having around what do we even expect? How do you begin to wrap your mind around this? And I've been talking about Project 2025 and bringing those up. Like those are literal, like a checklist of things they want to do. It's not just telling people they don't even know about the denaturalization program. And I think that's a failure of our corporate media, that, it's not about deporting illegals, about how they're going to go in there and take away people's citizenship who earned it.
Birthright, all of that, yes.
Yes. And so right now, what's your recommendation to folks about how to begin to frame this and even get your mind around it? Because it feels just so overwhelming.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I've been getting a lot of those literally directly too, and also folks who are just literally scared and saying, what can I do between now and January? How do we engage, post inauguration with a new administration, and by not engage with the administration, I'm guessing. But a couple things. One, really, people should understand that our organizations have been working together a tremendous amount, doing scenario planning. And we're not naive. I always joke at work, like, they don't call me worst case scenario Barbie for nothing. Like that's the way we have to think. It's the only way we'll protect ourselves. And so there is a tremendous amount of thought around what can happen in a lame duck session. How do we address and collaborate when the new administration starts, going down their list, and we're pretty high up. Trans kids, particularly, things that he can undo very easily. Like Title IX. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we're really talking to folks about. I mean, one of the things that, and you can find it on our social, you can find it on the social of the over 150 organizations that signed on, was really a message that we've got this and we've got us. Like, we really have to come together. One of the most heartbreaking and frustrating and challenging, and I have many words for this, things that I'm seeing are folks in our own community who are falling prey to the tropes of the knee-jerk Monday morning quarterbacking criticism that's coming out, blaming trans folks in a trans ad. This was about sexism and racism. Let's be honest. In this country, which has never wanted to recognize its own history of racism and sexism and colonization, and seeing leaders who are my peers who've been doing this a very long time, who are like, I'm checking out. Let the kids figure out this pronoun stuff, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's infuriating, but lots of things are. It's really heartbreaking because I'm really disappointed. These are the same folks who are saying, oh, marriage equality, let's go. I don't care that there's opposition, let's do it. That was okay. And now that our trans siblings and non-binary siblings are quite literally facing danger, that we need to step up. And so the Creating Change and the task force, frankly, has always really centered, particularly Black and brown trans and non-binary people. And you can expect that at Creating Change as well. So I'm excited. And I think the last thing I'll say is that the conference, I think, is something that for me every January sustains me through the rest of the year. And boy, we're going to need it, right? So we try and make it very accessible. We call it radical accessibility. So whether it's financial accessibility, you can volunteer 2 4-hour shifts and be waived your registration. Vegas is fabulous. Vegas is super excited that we're coming. They're also working with us, right? So the hotel is super reasonable. I can show you my room because I'm in it now. They're all suites. So, you have 3, 4 people that want to come together. My students from Montclair State are coming, and they're excited. They'll share a room, and they'll be able to afford to come and participate and really be able to, reap the benefits of a gathering that is really the largest queer community space for activists and allies that we do.
I'm glad because I did want to mention to folks that there are a variety of different registration options at different fee scales. And I just want to know, because you all have it on your website, almost 1,000 people had some type of financial assistance for New Orleans. So that's something that you all are very committed to. And yes, I saw that. I think it's amazing that you're offering free registration if people sign up for multiple volunteer shifts. So I think that radical accessibility, I think for folks who may be thinking, oh, wow, a multiple day conference, this must be so expensive. There are a variety of ways that folks can attend it and make it affordable to be able to go. For all of the registration options, folks go to thetaskforce.org. And I think, Cathy, I want to thank you for being and joining me here on The Gailey Show. I'm sure we're going to have you back again, or someone from the task force to talk about it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, as always.
And my guest joining me right now is Nicole Zelniker. Nicole has a new novel that is out. It is called From Where We Are. Nicole is the founder of the Knee Brace Press, and also their novel Until We Fall was a finalist for the Forward Indie Award in LGBTQ Adult Fiction. So we're very excited about this new novel, which also feels very timely, maybe, let's say, with what's been happening in the United States. So, Nicole, welcome to The Gailey Show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here and talk about gay things.
Yes. Well, why don't we start with your novel then, From Where We Are. It begins, as I understand it, with an escape from Holocaust Germany. So tell us more about your novel.
Yeah, so the novel itself is a collection of kind of interconnected stories that all go through this one family. And it starts in Holocaust Germany with Gabby, who does escape with her husband and her nephew. But I didn't want it to end there. I feel like so many stories about Jews are very Holocaust driven and take place during the Holocaust. And I wanted to show, that's kind of where this story starts, but it's not where it ends. So it goes through 2023 and explores themes of queerness and disability and family and intergenerational trauma. So that's kind of the gist of it.
So why did you want to write this particular story now? Like, where did it come from, the inspiration for it?
Yeah, so this actually, I had been thinking about it for a while. It's very much entrenched in my own family history and things that my own family has been through. So this started for me a while ago, and it didn't hit me until a couple years after I had written Gabby's story that it was a connected story or rather interconnected stories. And so I started doing that. I started querying the book maybe soon after that, and then ended up signing with a publisher after last October. So a big question that I get often is, did you start writing this after October 7th? And I didn't. I did get it signed, and I did think about when I was editing if I wanted to include more on the attack on Gaza and everything that was going on, but I do think that it's important to acknowledge that all of this was happening before. So I left it pretty much as is with, grammar edits and et cetera. But
yeah. So when you say interconnected, like what are the other stories that this initial Gabby story is interconnecting with?
Sure. So Gabby's story is the very first one. There are 8 chapters. So the second chapter then is Gabby's great-grandson, which takes place, many years later. His name is Jason, and it's his story of, I'm trying to figure out how to explain it without giving spoilers, but, he's living with his grandmother, Gabby's daughter. And so then later we also get a point of view chapter from Rebecca's perspective, Gabby's daughter, and then it kind of branches out to more of the extended family. So Gabby escapes with her nephew. So that nephew's son has a chapter. So it's all interconnected in that they're all family, and there are different characters mentioned throughout the chapters that are kind of through lines through different chapters.
What was that like doing the research for that? Right, because you've got all of this different time period. So how did that work for each of those different generations? Sure.
A lot of it was my own family history. I mentioned before, as someone who is descended from Holocaust survivors. But then a lot of it was also, Googling what were people wearing in the 1950s. And so each chapter kind of had its own. I really sat down to write each of those individually instead of kind of working on all of them at once. So there was a period where I'd sit down and be like, okay, well, Rebecca's story takes place primarily in the 50s. So I'm going to sit down and I'm going to research about the 1950s and research about, Jewish culture specifically in the 1950s. And Rebecca's a lesbian, but is closeted. And so what that might have looked like in the 1950s. So each story was kind of its own individual process.
I'm curious when you say that, because I'm the grandson and great-grandson of Armenian genocide survivors. And when you talk about leaning in on family history, I'm curious how that worked for you, because I feel like I still haven't gotten the full story. Like it comes out in bits and pieces over my lifetime, and I'm in my 40s now, and I feel like I just keep, someone will mention something and then I'll ask a question and then it'll immediately shut down. One person has actually written something that I'm okay, at least I have a written something here, but even that feels incomplete. So what was your experience with that?
Yeah. So I do think I've gotten bits and pieces over the course of my life. And I do think that there are different family members that are more willing to talk, and some that really want to talk about it, and some that are more closed off. And I think that that's part of what makes fiction so powerful, and that this is fiction, is that, I could kind of do some research and imagine what might have happened, or, change things that kind of suited this family's narrative. And, so I do think that there was the element of, this is very much my family story, and this is something that really happened to real people, but also it is fiction. So I don't necessarily need every single piece of my own family story to be able to tell the story of the family in the novel.
When you're talking about queerness, so like, I mean, statistically, I know that there are queer people in Armenian culture prior to the 21st century, but so much of it was suppressed, and particularly around, relationships. And so there's not that oral history there.
Mhm.
How did you navigate that, wanting to represent? I don't know if the situation though is the same within the Jewish community, particularly when you're looking at writing stories of the 50s and the 60s. How did
Sure.
you represent that, knowing that sometimes with those time periods we have to intuit, we have to imagine, which seems weird for talking
Yeah.
about the history. So how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I think first thing is that this is inherently like a Jewish story, and not like it is a Jewish story, but so it's a Jewish story. And so I kind of started from that and like what queerness looks like in Judaism. And so it really depends on what sect of Judaism you're a part of. I grew up Reformed, which is basically the super liberal Jews. And so there's no real, like when I came out to my mom, she was just like, "Are you sure you're bisexual and not a lesbian? Because I've always thought you were a lesbian." And I was like, "Thanks.
Oh.
Thanks for that." But like she knew and she was fine with it, right? Like it's never been a thing. And so that's kind of where I started in the basis for there are several queer characters whose point of views we get. So like Miranda, who's born in the 90s, who's only a couple years older than I am, that was very much a like her experience with being queer is pretty normative, versus Rebecca, who is in the 1950s. Then I had to do some research on, queer folks who were who we do have access to from that time period. And then also because she's closeted, I did think that made it, it's a very different experience, but also there was no, I didn't go very deeply into like queer culture or, like overarching queerness of that time period, because she is so isolated in that. So it very much depended on the character that I was working on in the time period.
Well, when I write about like Armenian themes and characters, I always end up finding out something about myself.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, oh, maybe that's why I think that way. Or,
Yeah.
oh, I had no idea that maybe subconsciously I was thinking this, and now it's, become conscious about it. And you're right, either in this novel or otherwise, actually, I'm more curious about this novel. Were there things you were discovering about yourself in writing it?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think that it was definitely an exercise in empathy for family members who, because no one in real life is a fully good or fully bad person, right? And I mean, there are some exceptions, like we just elected a fascist, but there are, there are so many shades of gray and there's so much nuance. And I think that this really was an exercise in learning empathy for people that had been that maybe I hadn't had as much empathy for, or the other way around, like how have people in my family that I really love maybe hurt other folks. So I think that was really, for me, seeing that kind of fleshed out in these characters, I think was an exercise in empathy for me. And then I think in terms of just like my own Jewishness, I've gone back and forth over the course of my life on like, am I Jewish if I don't believe in God? And am I Jewish if X, Y, Z? And I think that I'm much more secure in that now. And especially, I think, given the genocide that's happening in Gaza, I think that I've really needed to be like, okay, this is who I am. And I am, anti-genocide because I'm Jewish, not in spite of it. And there is one character I mentioned before, Miranda, who has kind of a very similar arc to my own in terms of like her experience with Palestine and learning about Palestine. And so I think that was not that I necessarily learned anything new, but I think it really kind of reinforced that, like, I am Jewish and this is important to me of it all.
Mm-hmm. Given the moment, specifically to the United States, where we have elected somebody who, this is not liberals, folks, who have saying he's a fascist. These are literally his former generals and staff that are claiming, he's got advisors around him that are like absolute, Holocaust deniers. Your book is taking on, I feel like, an entirely new significance, particularly, I feel, based off of its interconnected storytelling, right? That it's not just, a historical fiction text of something that happened then, but that was then, it's not happening now. How do you think about that in terms of, did that come up for you about, and I know education is difficult. Sorry, this is turning into a really long question. I feel like education is difficult as someone who is a, descendant of genocide survivors. I always feel like I have to take like 3 or 4 pages to explain, oh, by the way, you don't know anything about this, here it is.
Sure.
For you, and looking in this moment and how you're, how we're going to need to respond over the next 4 years, how do you see the urgency of your book maybe shifting or changing given the new reality that we find ourselves in?
Sure. I think that books in general, and especially, books that touch on historically marginalized communities, books that are queer, books that are disabled, are so interesting because they take on different significance in different time periods, but are always, they're always relevant, right? And I think that under Trump, the big thing that I am taking away from, my own work and writing about queer communities and family and everything is just how important it is to be there for each other and to be in community. And so, I don't really know what else to say beyond that, but I think that's
fair.
Yeah, that's so important to me.
That's fair. Well, Nicole Zelniker, congratulations on the novel From Where We Are. You can purchase your copy everywhere that you get books. And if you don't find it at your local library or your bookstore, tell them to stock it. And very quickly, how can folks connect with you personally?
Yes, I am on Instagram and Threads at Nicole Zelniker, just my name, and then on TikTok at Nicole Writes Books.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us on The Gaily Show. Folks, you can follow us on Threads. I just started up on Threads. If you want to follow us there, follow us on Instagram at @_Gaily Show for free tickets to shows that are happening in the Twin Cities. Obviously, you can find us at thisqueerbook.com. And until next Saturday, see you queers and allies in the bookstores.